started because we've missed seeing everyone at our monthly programs, and that was always a good time to kind of touch base with members and kind of chat and be able to answer questions and do some of that visitation pre-programs. And so since we haven't been able to do that for some time now, in particular, we wanted to give members a chance to ask some questions and to be able to share some of our experiences and knowledge with you. So that was kind of what started the idea for tonight's program. So it's based on some of the more frequent questions we get, and we had put out a request for questions back in for December and January. So tonight's program is specifically based on questions we got back in December, January, and from our members survey that we sent out last year. We've also received some additional questions since that time, and so we're keeping a list of those questions, and we welcome any of you to submit additional questions in the chat box this evening. And we probably won't be able to get to those questions tonight, but we will try to work those questions and getting answers to those into future programs, or possibly in articles in our newsletter or on our social media, so that we're still getting that information out to you guys. We'll try and address, besides trying to address them tonight, the people who are going to be assisting with addressing the questions that we're reviewing. We're lucky enough to have board members Hal Mann, John Zabowski, and Kate Mason-Wolf, who are going to be answering the questions for tonight's program. We don't claim to be experts, but we're fellow native plant enthusiasts, and we're sharing our experiences and knowledge with you. We're going to go ahead and get started so we can try to address as many questions as possible tonight. Hal's going to start us off with the first question, which is, Hal, members are wanting to know, what do they do with those seeds they've collected? So once they collected them, how do they start them?
Okay, I'm going to try sharing my screen here. And you should see a slide that says seed starting.
Yes, we see it.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, this is certainly a huge subject. I mean, we could have a full day webinar. There's probably week-long webinars on this. And in fact, we are going to have in October, I believe it is, Angie can confirm, but I believe in October, our whole program is going to be about seeds. Penny's going to talk about when to collect them and what to do with them, and that. So I'm just going to give a brief overview, a real quick overview about seed starting. And for those of you not familiar with native plant seeds, you should start off knowing that these are not like vegetable seeds where you just sprinkle the little seed out of the package and the peas come up in 3 or 4 days. And, you know, you've got a jack and a beanstalk to deal with. These are native plants. And because they evolved here in specific conditions, and even all the plants in our area evolved in different environmental conditions, each species has really a specific requirement for germination because they each evolve differently and they each fit into a certain niche in the ecosystems. So for their survival and their propagation, they've all developed different techniques and requirements. But one of the most common ones that applies to probably most of the seeds, most of the plants we grow in our yards, is that of cold, moist stratification. And what that means is in order for that seed to germinate, it has to be cold and moist for somewhere between 30 and 60 days. So that means probably the easiest way to start seeds is to go out in your yard tomorrow and take those seeds, if you know where you want to grow them, and sprinkle them on top of the snow. That way you'll be able to see where they go. But you could also move the snow aside and scratch down to the ground and sprinkle them in there as well. The problem with that, though, is it's going to have problems with animals eating them and them getting, the water, the rain, and the melting snow, moving those seeds around a lot. But that's probably the easiest way to do it. I think the Toledo Zoo does it often that way when they're doing their new prairies. But the second easiest way, in my opinion, is to take a little bit more control, but also let nature help you along with that. And what I do, a lot of people do, is get a little container. It can be really, really small, like a Jello cup or something. In this case, you see some that we got blueberries in from the grocery store, and they have holes in the bottom. You fill this up almost to the top with a soilless mix, potting mix. And then you sprinkle it, and this needs to be damp. Doesn't have to be super wet, just damp. And then you sprinkle your seeds on top of there. If they're larger, if they're really, really tiny seeds like dusts, like some of our plants are, you can just leave it at that after you sprinkle them on there. And then push your hand down on it a little bit to get them in contact with that soil. If they're larger, little bit larger seeds, like a lot of the plants are, you put another small, tiny layer of dirt over those, but still press it down with your hand. I gotta caution you that one of the really important things is to make sure that you get a good label on these things. Even I can't tell you how many of us with outdoor magic markers and indelible magic markers have come out in the spring and found out they didn't fare well over the winter. So we're guessing when we see what comes up with what they are. In this case, what I've been using are those dino label kind of things. So those work pretty well. But what you do with this is after you get it to this condition, you take it outside and you put it out there and let nature do its course. In this case, what I did is I put some hardware cloth over the top of these because the raccoons and squirrels just love to dig in fresh dirt, which just destroys the whole program. So you just let everything happen there during the winter, the snow, the rain in the spring, and that will all take care of itself. What you see on the right side is another really popular technique, and that is using plastic milk jugs. I'm not an expert in that, and I don't use it, but the idea is you take a plastic milk jug, cut it in half, put the soil in there, punch holes in the bottom of the container first, and then put the seed in like we were doing with the other containers, and then seal it back up. And it becomes like a mini greenhouse. And you leave the top off of that and just make sure that it stays moist. So in the spring, all of this is going to, these seeds are going to germinate. Now, the next technique, and I've used this a lot, but I don't do it anymore, and that is to grow the seeds indoors. And we still have to mimic what nature's doing. So we're doing this cold, moist stratification. And what I do as soon as I collect the seeds is I put them in a small Ziploc bag with damp milled sphagnum moss. You could also use soilless potting mix, but make sure it's damp, seal it up, and put it in the refrigerator. And in February or late January, after it's had at least 60 days of cold, moist stratification, you put them into those same kind of containers and just put them under grow lights. And I've actually used regular fluorescent lights. In this case, I was using a heat mat and I had it set for 70 degrees. Now, I found out that a lot of these seeds after they went through that cold, moist stratification, they germinated in 3 or 4 days. And so then you have the little seedlings popping up. And at this point, then I started to use a very, very weak solution of fertilizer, very, very weak. And we say native plants don't need fertilizer, but when we're growing them in soil that doesn't have the microorganisms in it, they need a little bit of that. So maybe in about a month, they've grown up enough that they have true leaves now. And then you transplant those into some sort of container and let them grow out there until roots come out the bottom. Again, I just took these outside at that point, And, you know, it was warm enough for them to grow out. Again, putting a little bit of weak fertilizer on them maybe once a week and keeping them moist. So that's it. It's easy. I think it's easy peasy for most of these common species like that. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to Angie.
Thank you, Hal. Appreciate that. So for our second question, Kate is going to be addressing, it's kind of multiple layers of questions in regards to insects and solutions regarding insect problems. There were some specific questions in regards to aphids and milkweed beetles and milkweed bugs, as well as in regards to one of our members who had some issues with a decrease in butterflies and increase in wasps in her yard. And could the wasps be possibly endangering the caterpillars and butterflies? And is there any way to manage the garden so that they can both coexist? So I'm going to let Kate take it from there.
All right, thanks, Angie. I'm going to share my screen again. And oh, there we go. Yeah, so this is just kind of an example of a lot of different both butterflies and other critters that use various plants in our gardens, our native gardens. So we've got a monarch butterfly on some common boneset nectarine. We have I'm pretty sure this is what's it called? A silver spotted skipper on some obedient plant. And a tiger swallowtail on some geopieweed. I have a spice bush swallowtail, I believe, just hanging out on the deck one wet morning. I have a great spangled fritillary that's on, I think, on a sweet gum tree that's at oak openings. Of course, a monarch caterpillar on common milkweed, and this adorable little gray tree frog on common milkweed, and then I think this is a green darner dragonfly on common milkweed. So that's just kind of give you an idea of all the different critters that use our plants, and you know the variety of plants that various butterflies will use. So the main message, I guess, from in terms of native plant gardening is that providing a healthy ecosystem is the most important thing. And when you have a healthy ecosystem, your native plants are going to get eaten. Some of those critters that eat your native plants are also going to get eaten by either other predatory insects or arachnids like spiders, or birds, other mammals. So just the idea of native plant gardening is you have to get used to the idea that your plants are going to be predated, and then those critters are also going to be predated. According to the National Wildlife Foundation Native Plant Finder resource, there are 12 Lepidoptera in Northwest Ohio who use milkweed as a host plant. So, we think of monarchs, of course, all the time when we think about milkweed, but that's just 12 other Lepidoptera, moths and butterflies, and there are countless other beetles and bugs that also use it. So it supports a lot of different life. So the biggest insect threat for monarchs and many other butterflies is actually parasitic wasps and flies, which are typically very small, and they lay their eggs on the larvae. The eggs hatch and they consume the larva when it reaches maturity. So it's all very well timed. Larger wasps generally avoid eating monarchs in particular because of the toxins that the monarch larvae absorb from eating the milkweed. They might eat the larvae of other butterflies and moths, but really it's those parasitic wasps and flies, and there's really not much you can do about that because they're so small. It would be hard to see them or find them. So this is just an example of some examples of the variety of bugs and beetles and other caterpillars that use milkweed. And so we have some of these plants, or most of these pictures are by Rick Barraclough. So thank you, Rick, for providing those photos for me. So we have large milkweed bugs in all stages of development in this picture up in the upper left-hand corner, all the way from nymphs up through adults. And these often will appear kind of later in the summer. And people can get pretty worried about them because they show up in a big mass like this, and it looks pretty alarming. They go after the seed pods mostly and the flowers. They don't really spend a lot of time eating the leaves. So in that way, they're not really interfering with the caterpillars that are eating the plant, because the caterpillars are eating the leaves, and these bugs typically are focused more on the seed pods and the flowers. This is a milkweed beetle with some oleander aphids in the background, and we're going to talk about the oleander aphids in a minute. This is a red milkweed bug. This one right here on the white on the flowers is a small or false milkweed bug. And then up in this right-hand corner, upper right-hand corner, is the tussock moth caterpillar. And this is another one that can look kind of alarming, because oftentimes you will see a lot of them on milkweed at the same time, and they will form a little line, and they'll like all work together, munching their way across the leaf. And they do eat the leaves. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, these are the oleander aphids. And the oleander aphids are not native, but they do have native predators. And this is a photo from Joe Boggs at OSU Extension from the Beagle Alert that he posted. So these dark colored aphids that you see amongst all the bright orange ones are actually what they call aphid mummies. So these aphids have been parasitized in a similar way to how butterfly larvae can be parasitized. So some tiny little wasp or fly laid its eggs on an aphid, and then those new wasps and flies are eating up that aphid while they grow. It's all kind of sci-fi sounding, but so it's actually very beneficial when you see these little aphid mummies just to leave that population alone, because they're actually producing more predators of the aphids, and that will really help keep the aphid population in control. It's not advised to use, certainly not any kind of insecticide, but even like the insecticidal soaps that are supposed to be safe, those can be damaging for especially very young larvae of any kind, whether it's monarchs or other Lepidoptera. So you really don't want to use any kind of insecticidal soap. If the aphids really get out of control, what I have done occasionally after checking to make sure there aren't any of these aphid mummies is I'll just use, put a glove on and just kind of wipe the aphids off, smushing them as I go. It's pretty messy because they turn your hand orange if you're not wearing a glove. And that will, control the population in the immediate future. But it's just all part of, even though oleander aphids aren't native, they're still just part of this ecosystem that happens when you have a good variety of native plants. I know Heather Holmes recommends planting Virginia mountain mint and other pycnanthemum species. Pycnanthemum is the mountain mint species, and genus rather. And so those seem to do a particularly good job of attracting the beneficial insects, the predatory insects that will help keep some of these other arthropods in control that are maybe the less desirable ones. I highly recommend, I have several of these Beagle alerts on this slide, and I highly recommend checking them out, because Joe Boggs. They're all done by Joe Boggs. And he makes a really good argument for just leaving it alone. Don't worry about, if your monarchs are not, if you think other bugs are interfering with the monarchs being able to eat their milkweed, milkweed is not there just for the monarchs. And, I think a lot of people think, oh, I've got to plant the milkweed for the monarchs. But, as we've talked about, and as he talks about in his Beagle Alerts, there's just a host of other organisms that use milkweed as their plant of choice. And a lot of them do eat it for the same reason that monarch caterpillars eat it, and that is to absorb those toxins into their bodies so that they're less appealing to other insect predators. So I just want to make sure I didn't forget to mention anything. I did want to also say that in some years you will find the butterfly population fluctuates, and that can have nothing to do with what you're doing in your garden. It can be weather related. We have a particularly wet spring. Predator populations can also fluctuate, which will affect the larvae, the monarch larvae population. So you might have a great year for birds who want to eat some of those monarch larvae. So vegetation cover can also impact it. So there are lots of different things that impact butterfly populations from year to year. So if you have one year where you're seeing a lot of butterflies and the next year you don't see as many, it's not necessarily anything that you did right or wrong. It's just, that's kind of the way the cycle goes. And I think that was it, I think, for that question. Oh, I did want to mention, because this person particularly asked about cicada killer wasps. So I also wanted to say that cicada killer wasps, as their name implies, feed exclusively on dog day cicadas. So these are the cicadas that we see every year rather than the periodical ones. The cicada killer wasps are quite large. I think they might be one of the biggest wasps we have around here. They can look very threatening, but they are virtually harmless to humans. The males, who are the ones that do most of the flying around and roaming around looking threatening, don't even have a stinger, so they can't actually do any harm to you at all. And the females are pretty docile and way more interested in tending to their young and their nest rather than stinging anybody. So, but what they do is they paralyze a cicada, and they take it back to their nest and they lay their eggs on it. And then those larvae, when that larvae hatch, they eat the cicada that's been paralyzed. And so that's why they're called cicada killer wasps. And they don't prey on anything other than cicadas. And I mentioned that birds, they love to eat larvae, and I can attest it's heartbreaking to sit and watch a bird come and pick off, 10 or 15 of your little swallowtail caterpillar larvae that are out there on my fennel. This happened a couple of years ago, but I just, you have to remember that they're feeding their young. And, if we want a nice balance of insects and birds, then we have to accept that the birds are going to eat some of our caterpillars. And I also wanted to reiterate, it's very important to avoid using any kind of insecticide, and also make sure when you're buying plants to check to make sure that where you're buying them has never used neonicotinoids, which have been shown to have an adverse effect on pollinators. And neonicotinoids is a kind of insecticide that is absorbed through the roots of the plant. And so there's not definitive answers, but a lot of studies going on, and it seems like there's definitely a connection between neonicotinoids being residual in plants and affecting the insects that eat those plants or nectar on those plants. And also, if your community does any aerial mosquito spraying, you normally you can call and request that they fly past your yard. Now, of course, they're still going to be spraying on either side of your yard, but at least it should help a little bit if they stop spraying when they get to your house. So again, I wanted to point out these articles from Beagle that I would highly recommend checking out if you want more information. and a couple of other websites that I posted down on the bottom just as credit for where I got some of my information. So that's all I've got. I'm going to stop my share now and turn it back to Angie.
All right, thank you, Kate. And I know there were a couple people mentioning about not seeing as many pollinators in their yards last year. And I just want to reassure you that was normal. Many of us didn't have near as many pollinators in our yard. I actually monitor for the Ohio Lepidopterists, and there was definitely lower numbers of butterflies and other pollinators around the area last year. So you're not alone. It's one of those cycles. We're going to hope this year's a better one. Okay, John, you're up, and John's going to be addressing how to add more natives to your yard.
Okay. So there's quite a few different ways to add natives. Hal kind of mentioned already a little bit. Now is a good time to do snow seeding. If you have seeds, you know, sprinkle them on the ground when there's a heavy snow. That helps to cover the seeds and it hides them from the birds. One thing I do in the fall, if I know an area where I want to seed, is I take a landscape rake and kind of scratch up the ground first. And then just kind of remember where it's at. And then when it starts snowing, throw the seeds out. Some other ways would be to simply stop mowing an area. I found that in my yard, if I do that, I will have all kinds of natives. You know, tall ironweed likes to move around, swamp milkweed, tall sunflower, stuff like that. If you just stop mowing an area, they'll find that spot. So
Hey, John, can I mention one thing with that?
Sure.
You're referring to you already have some natives there that the seeds are dispersing, correct? Not that just natives are just gonna necessarily appear out of nowhere.
Yes, correct. Yeah, that's a good point. Yes. Yep. Another option, basically, you know, you can divide plants. You can do this in the spring or fall, depending on the species. You can take a spade shovel and kind of cut them in half or cut them in quarters and move them around. When you do that, you do want to make sure you water them, you know, kind of baby them for a while, but they'll usually take right off. And, you know, if it's a more aggressive native, you really won't have to do a whole lot of anything. So just move it, baby it a little bit, and it'll be very happy. And another way is to obviously check out the plant sales, like Kim Smith mentioned in the chat. You know, she's updating the website, you know, and this year is still kind of up in the air, but I'm sure there will be some native plant sales, and we also have native seed packets. So at some point, you know, we'll probably start handing those out again once we know what we're going to be allowed to do as far as meeting wise and stuff like that. So. And that's really kind of about all I have. Honestly, if you've got some plants in your yard, just stop mowing an area and see what comes up. You know, and I let the grass stay tall. It really doesn't hurt anything. It's good for the insects. It gives them a place to hide. And the birds like it too. They'll come down and feed on the insects. So.
All right.
In turn, I just wanted to mention real quick, we are planning to do our Blue Week plant sale.
Okay.
So we haven't had a meeting about that yet, but we don't know whether it's going to be an in-person or an online like it was last year, but look for the news of that coming up.
Okay, great.
Okay, so Kate has our next question. She was brave and took all these critter questions. So this question is in regards to anthills. The question was that there's anthills in an area that is not mowed or cultivated. Is there any way to get rid of anthills without using poisons that would harm the birds that eat ants? Some of the anthills are possible tripping hazards. So take it away, Kate.
All right. I just want to ask, can you guys hear the dinging coming from my computer?
No.
Okay, good, good. I just wanted to make sure that wasn't bothering people. All right, I am going to share my screen again, and I don't know exactly what kind of ant this person was asking about because I, didn't get a picture or anything. But the only ant that we really have in our area that would create a mound that's big enough to be a tripping hazard would be the Allegheny mound ants. And again, thanks to Rick Barraclough for these photos. So these are, he said these were taken out at Kitty Todd Preserve, which there are a lot of ant mounds in Kitty Todd. What these ants do is they use formic acid to kill the plants in the area surrounding the mound. And then the mound itself acts as kind of an incubator for the eggs and for the young. So that's kind of the reason behind all of that. So they're typically, when you see the ant mounds, they don't have any vegetation growing on them, and that's why. They don't like areas that are shaded. So if you're having problems with ants, building these mounds in areas that you don't want them, trying to keep, maybe some trees growing so that they provide shade from a higher level. I guess these ants are actually known to kill trees as well, but trees are one way to keep an area shaded that will just deter the ants. As far as getting rid of the mounds that are already there without using any kind of, insecticide, the best option is to rake them out. And Hal, I think, has had some experience with this as well. It's not going to get rid of them with a one shot. You have to rake them, and the website that I looked at, which I've referenced down here, is Michigan State website. They recommend doing this 2 to 3 times a year throughout the growing season, and then each year you'll most likely have to also repeat that. So you definitely, when you're disturbing these ant mounds, that can make the ants pretty angry, obviously. So you want to, wear long pants, closed-toed shoes, socks, tuck your pants into your socks so that the ants can't crawl up onto your bare skin. You don't want ants in your pants. And these ants will bite. Pretty much any ants will bite, but these ants can have a particularly painful bite. And you can find this website I found had pretty good information about just sort of the whole biology of the ant, rather than so many of the websites you see just try to tell you how to kill them. So, and ants are very beneficial insects to have around. They're, I think as the person who sent the question and mentioned, birds will eat them, but then also ants can be predatory on other insects. So they're definitely good critters to have around. But if their mound is in an inconvenient place, you definitely don't want to. They provide a stinging hazard. So if you have people walking around and standing on the mound, then they could get stung. So that is probably the best way to deal with the Allegheny ant mound. You are muted, Angie.
Thank you, Kate. All right, next we have Hal on how to keep plants hydrated during hot spells.
Well, I was kind of surprised about this question because those of us who have known native plants for a while know that one of their hallmarks is that once these are established, you don't need to water them. And so I didn't know where the question was coming from. But then I remembered that it's a key word I had in there, or phrase: once they're established, they don't need watering. So this is a picture from Simpson Garden Park from 2012 down in Bowling Green. And if you remember that 2012, we had horrible heat during the summer. Weeks and weeks in the high 90s and then 100 degrees, days on end. And this picture was taken in the height of that drought and heat wave that we had. And we didn't water these plants at all. But these plants were 2 years old at the time of this picture. And the year before, we watered them a lot to get them established. So that's one reason that you're going to water plants, is to make sure that they get established well. And I suppose one of the other reasons that I've used is that if I've wanted to grow a plant that likes wet conditions, but I don't have a wet condition where I want it, then I'll go to the extra trouble of watering that. The cardinal flower is kind of one of my plants that I'd really, really like to have, and I'll go to that extra trouble of doing it. Of course, there's a lot of different ways to take care of watering, but suppose one of the most common ways is, let's see if I can get this slide to advance, is to just use a sprinkler. Hook up a hose and a sprinkler. I'd recommend that you put a timer on these things, because if you get distracted like I often do, you could come out and find out 4 hours later you've been running that water meter around pretty darn fast. So that, but that works pretty well. And you can get rather inexpensive mechanical timers to attach to your faucet, or more expensive digital ones that you can set up the water at certain times of the day and for X amount of time, and certain days of the week, et cetera. So you have a lot of flexibility doing that. But when these plants are just getting established, you might have to water them to keep them going well. The other way that I take care of watering is using drip irrigation. And I have found this to be immensely helpful to me because I'm so darn lazy. And this is a company I hooked into a few years ago. I think they may be in California, but you can buy drip systems at the big box stores, or you could just Google this, drip irrigation. There's Sprinkler Warehouse and some others. And the way this works is you hook up this tube to your faucet, but first you have to hook up a pressure device that lowers the pressure on your water faucet from 40 or 60 pounds that comes out of it down to 10 or 15 pounds. And then you also put a filter. These come in as kits, and you can buy these parts as well, because you're going to be emitting the water through such tiny, tiny little holes. You have to make sure that nothing gets through there that is going to clog those up. But the way then you run these lines, you see these lines that I didn't have this all laid out yet. I was just starting to do this, but these are like 1/2-inch plastic lines you run, and you put these little tiny emitters in, or you could put some 1/4-inch tubing that'll hook into these. But you can run these emitters out to a specific plant if you want to water just one plant. And these emitters will water, you can get different sizes, but they'll do like 1/4 gallon per hour. So you can put, or 1/2 gallon per hour, or 1 gallon per hour. You can put a lot of emitters on one of these 1/2-inch lines here, and you can just run them wherever you need to. So I use that a lot when I'm putting in new plants. Like this was back in 2012 when we were just doing this place in our yard. But when I'm putting in new plants, I'll run one of these lines to it. And also on that backyard nursery where I move the plants over to the driveway to grow them out more, I'll hook up these kind of things to a drip irrigation line, so that I'm really conserving water a lot. You could see in that previous slide how much water is coming out of those sprinklers. But these really, really conserve the water. Plus, it's putting the water directly to the root system of the plant that needs it. So I've used that quite effectively. And I guess that's about all I got to say about hydration, unless you want to make sure you are being well hydrated when you're out working in your yard.
Thank you, Hal.
Well, with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Angie.
So next up we have John, and we have a question about Calorie pear saplings. So somebody submitted saying that last fall they suddenly discovered an alarming number of Calorie pear saplings had shown up on their small 3/4 acre suburban property. They tried to dig several out, but found that the roots were way too deep. What's the easiest, best way for them to get rid of or kill the Calorie pear sapling?
Okay. Yes, Calorie pear are very, very invasive. It's a nasty tree. The best way to remove them is to cut them with loppers and then immediately treat the stumps with a systemic herbicide. An undiluted glyphosate, such as Roundup, is the best treatment for the cut stump, and you just dab it right on the stump itself. And, you know, that will usually take care of most of it. It may resprout, so you may have to treat it, you know, 2 or 3 times. But basically cutting them and then treating them immediately with herbicide will do a lot of good. You can also use a foliar treatment on the saplings, and that would be more of a solution of 25% triclopure ester and 75% crop oil, and that helps the crop oil will help the triclopure stick to it. Like I say, both treatments will probably need to be done 2 or 3 times just to kill the resprouts. And make sure you read all the directions and precautions on any herbicide labels. You will always want to follow that label. And both the glyphosate and the triclopure are available at most hardware stores. Another option would be to mow the saplings. That doesn't tend to work so well just because they do resprout so fast. But that is an option if you want to, I guess, knock them down quick, you know, and you could keep doing that. Sometimes other plants around them could possibly outcompete them, but Calorie pear is kind of hard to mow to get rid of. Some of the smaller seedlings can be pulled by hand when the ground is moist, but once they get too big, like the question was asked, you know, digging them is really hard because the roots do go deep. And a little more history on Calorie pears too. They were brought here from China in 1917, 1918, somewhere in there. And then also in the United States, we produced the Bradford pear, which is a cultivar. And the Bradford pear was designed to be a non-invasive and sterile. But unfortunately, when these 2 pear trees cross-pollinate, the Bradford variety produces fruit and becomes invasive. So it's kind of like a double whammy there. And Calorie pear is still currently allowed to be sold in Ohio until January of 2023. Then it will be illegal, which is great. And then also many other states are starting to ban the sale of these trees. So if you have one, even a larger tree, I would recommend, you know, if you can, cut it down or have it cut down, get rid of it, treat the stump, have it ground out or put some herbicide on it. You know, get rid of them. They are nasty trees. So, and that's all I have for that. I mean, it's, you know, if you're a member, we would probably even be happy to help you remove them. So once we can start doing stewardship again. So
Thank you, John.
Yep, and then that would also, you know, the cut and treat method also works for honeysuckle and other, you know, invasives too.
Next we have Kate. Kate, we had some questions in regards to designs or native plant gardens. So Kate's going to talk a little bit about the new Wild Ones garden designs.
All right, I'm going to actually go over to the website so you guys can, so I can show you the, well, that didn't work. Let's see. Let's see if I can do this again. I got it. Sorry, everybody. All right, here it is. Okay, gotta exit that. And get over to this. There we go. Okay, so you guys can all see my the wildones.org website, right?
There's a square over it for me.
Oh, really?
The select a window to share one is up on my screen.
Oh. I'm not
It's
sure.
gone.
It's gone? Okay, good. All right, so if you go to wildones.org, and you can also go to our chapter website, and Kim has put a link to it under the Learn tab on our chapter website. But they have created this pretty amazing landscape design website. And so you just click on their garden design website, and it will take you to, first it takes you through kind of a booklet. I mean, I do have actual paper booklets of these websites, but of these web pages, but they're all on the website. So it kind of takes you through, you know, why you want to plant natives, and gives some examples of native plants that might be beneficial in your garden, and creating your plan. So various steps to just think about and to help you, you know, plan ahead, you know, plan out what you're going to do. I'm very bad at that. I tend to go buy a bunch of plants and then bring them home and decide where to plant them after I've purchased them. So a slightly better way is to get it all planned out and figure out what plants will work best where. And then, you know, it takes you through the steps of installing your garden and then maintaining your garden. So this is really helpful information. And in addition to all of that, they also have several native garden designs, and we are lucky enough that there's one specific to Toledo. And we have a, so you can go to this particular, you know, Toledo garden design, and there's a video that will kind of take you through the landscape and describe how everything's laid out. It actually has a, you know, like take a yard and how you might arrange your plants throughout the yard. Notice that they have left areas of lawn, which I think is pretty important for a lot of us that live in subdivisions, where not everybody in the neighborhood is maybe as excited about native plants as we are. So having a you know, very distinct border to your garden and having some lawn space just helps it to look intentional rather than just, you know, I'm throwing things out there willy-nilly and nobody's really taking care of it. So anyway, this just kind of takes you through the various phases of, you know, doing one section at a time, so you're not like ripping out your entire yard all at once. And then provides a great plant list and kind of tells you where these plants can grow. When you click on each plant, it kind of tells you where they'll, whether it needs to be in shade or sun or what kind of soil. Susan Hall and Denise Gehring are the two that worked on this, so they did a fantastic job. There is a, okay, you can download the Toledo Garden Design, and so you actually can download the PDF that will, that has all this information on it. And I'm pretty sure in that Garden Design PDF, it takes you through the individual sections of the yard, and that's where it kind of identifies which plants are where. So you'll see in this big overall design, it doesn't have each of these plants labeled, but it will, it does that in that PDF, I believe. And I think the reason that they didn't, I kind of think the reason they didn't specify each of these plants is because it kind of depends on how your house is situated and where the sun hits it, you know, if it's where the sun is in the morning and the evening and all of that. So you might need to modify your plan a little bit depending on how your house is situated. And obviously, you know, not everybody's yard is laid out exactly like this, yard and house. So anyway, that is the garden design website, and you can get to that. And then there are several other, if you're just curious, there are several other garden designs for other areas of the country as well. So they have quite a lot of information in there. And unless did anybody have any questions about it that popped up in the chat box?
No, not at this moment, not related to the design.
Okay.
So we are already close to 8 o'clock, but we're going to go ahead and try to get at least another question or two in if we can. So Hal, I think you're up next on with the question of how to kill grass and prep an area for planting.
Well, I love killing grass. I don't know if I love that more than killing invasives, but they got to be neck and neck right there, killing grass. Now, there's a lot of ways to do this, and arguably there's some controversy about some particular techniques. But I'll tell you, with me, you know, some people will say go spray Roundup, and then, you know, that'll take care of it for a while. But with me, I want to stay away from chemicals as much as possible, particularly the really toxic ones like Roundup, you know, that have cancer-causing issues and stay around for a long time and is just nasty stuff. So I'm going to do anything I can to stay away from chemicals. Now there are some organic chemicals. I think Burnout might be one of them, but I know there are some alternatives to that. The other thing I want to do when I'm working on a site is I want to preserve as much as the life in the soil as I can. The microorganisms that are there are really important for the health of the plants. And I know they'll come back, you know, after a while if you destroy them, but I'd kind of like to leave them alone, make sure they're doing their thing from day one. One of the techniques I've heard about and a lot of people use is called solarization, where they'll take a black plastic and lay it out in the summer and let the sun heat up the ground and kill the grass. And I think that I don't personally like that way of doing it because I think it also kills some of those top layer of microorganisms. But again, you know, surely they'd come back. And the idea is that you not only want to kill the grass, but you want to kill or get rid of the weed seeds that are sitting in that soil ready to come out too. Now, one of the other things I want to point out right away before I go further is that you don't want to put any compost or fertilizer into a new garden bed. You know, these are native plants and they were here before anybody came up with rapid grow or how to make compost in 14 days. You know, everything that they need is in the soil. And if you add extra nutrients to that soil in the way of compost or fertilizer, you're going to end up with some wild and woolly plants. I can tell you that I did that. I thought a little compost can't hurt. A lot of compost will be better. And to the moon, those plants went. A good book that I found was Catherine Zimmerman's Urban and Suburban Meadows. She talks about a lot of ways to deal with starting a new prairie or meadow or a small garden in your yard. And she highlights some things, one of which, and this is fairly popular method, is to lay out newspaper and cardboard in the area that you're going to plant. Now this is, you know, you got to do this like, you know, 6-8 months ahead of time, maybe even let this go all through the winter. So you have to have some planning and doing this kind of thing. But once you get that laid down, then you're going to water it, soak that in, and then you got to get something to go over the top of that, like mulch or that'll keep that newspaper and cardboard from blowing around to anchor it down. And the idea is that this will, over time, over a couple of seasons, that this will break down and kill the grass that's there. And you go from there. You can just plant your plugs right into that medium, right through that. The other thing that you can do, and I've done this, is more of a mechanical way of doing it because I don't have the patience. You tell me I've got to wait 6 months to plant something, that's just not going to happen. So I've used this tool. This is a mattock, and you can see my feet down here, which is gives you an idea of the size of this thing. And it's fairly heavy. You get a little bit of a workout using this thing to scoop grass up, but it's pretty effective. I think I bought this at Lowe's. It may be about $30, and it's pretty hardy in getting into the hard clay soil that we've got, and it can pick out rocks and things like that. I use that in this rain garden that I put together off the side of the driveway. So I was using that to pick out the grass, scoop up the grass, and left this soil down here. And I saved all this grass because what I wanted to do was turn it upside down. What I did was put the plants in and turned all that grass upside down to use as mulch. So that would keep the weeds from sprouting up and going crazy in there. And this was a fairly ugly looking thing. It was, that dead grass laying there, roots up, didn't look real appealing at first. So I thought I better explain to the neighborhood what I'm doing here. So I put this sign up, and that took care of any complaints that we had. So once it filled in, it became pretty attractive. The other thing you can do is, if you've got a large area, you can rent a sod cutter. And that's what we did on a project we started, is we rented this thing from the tool rental shop. I think it was about $45 for the day. And it literally cuts the sod into strips, and then you can roll them up. I used them with some erosion problems in the back, but I don't see why these wouldn't also be good mulch piled up upside down. This is a pretty heavy piece of equipment. You don't just go throw it in the back of your Prius. You're going to need a pickup truck or have it delivered or something. It's pretty heavy, but you can do a lot of work pretty quick with this, and you can see that you can get a pretty sharp edge on it as well. So that's what we did when we yanked up 2,000 square feet of lawn a few years ago. We used that sod cutter to do that. So those are the ways that I've used to get rid of grass and to kill grass. One thing I'll note with you on the sod cutter is you want to make sure you set the depth of that blade that's cutting underneath the grass. If you don't set that deep enough, some of the roots that are in that grass, these are not deep roots, certainly, but maybe they're 3-4 inches down, they're going to re-sprout. So you want to get as deep as you can, and that makes those rolls of grass heavier, certainly. So you get another workout moving those rolls of those big piles of grass around. So that's what we did, and I hope that gives you at least some ideas about how to go about that. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Angie.
All right, thank you, Hal. All right, we're going to try to at least get one more in here, John. We've questioned about how to maintain plants so they don't get out of control or too wild looking in a small urban setting.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to try to share my screen. So this is my yard. I've got about a ½ acre in West Toledo. I let it get out of control, maybe a little too much at times, but you can see here, you can see the tall grass. Basically that's where I stop mowing, and then I mow a path kind of down the center. And as you can see, the wildlife love it. So I have deer in my yard daily. I had 4 of them tonight come up. They will actually come up to the patio and drink water out of the water dish. So they're very happy. But, you know, one way to maintain them, you can cut taller plants back early in the year, say around early June, mid-June, something like that. Cut them down about 12 inches, but you want to check them first for caterpillars, because there's a lot of butterflies and moths that have broods in the late spring, and they rely on these plants. Like I have a lot of common bone set, and I will try to cut that back if it's not covered with caterpillars, because it does get kind of tall in my yard. And the plants will still grow back and flower. They'll be a little bushier, and they'll actually, most of the time, they'll have more blooms. So that's one good way to control them. Another option is to hand weed. If you've got a lot of baby natives that you don't want, you can pull them out after a rain. You can pull them out, you can transplant them, you know, give them away to people, stuff like that. You know, I've gotten a flat of cardinal flower from Kate before, of just, you know, babies that she's pulled out of her sidewalk or something. So that's another good option. And, you know, those transplant pretty easy, and it's a good way, you know, they're free plants, and it's a good way to use them up. Mowing is another option. I have a lot of jewel weed in my yard around my rain garden. It kind of takes over, but I'll mow it high, you know, 3 or 4 inches, and I'd rather have that than the grass. So that's, you know, another option. And some of them, even if you mow them tall, they will still flower depending on what kind of species it is. Sometimes I'll even use a string trimmer and just hold it, you know, kind of waist high if plants are getting out of control, and just kind of cut them back like that too. And, you know, there's some plants that you can grow in pots, like, you know, the mints, mountain mint, you can do that with, because the mints are very aggressive sometimes and they will take over. But if you do grow them in pots, it kind of keeps them in check. And, you know, Rick Barraclough does this at his house, and he's very successful at it. You know, he's grown swamp milkweed in pots too. You know, some stuff you'll have to water more, but I would think like blue lobelia, golden Alexanders, stuff like that, you can grow those in pots. You're just going to have to water them, I would think, 2 or 3 times a week. But really, it's just, you know, it's kind of what you want. You know, you can see in my yard, you know, I've got prairie dock, and, you know, I'll have Joe Pieweed that gets 10 foot tall. But I also let my neighbors know that, you know, they're there for a reason, and they enjoy seeing the birds and the butterflies and the deer and whatever animals come into the yard. So it's okay to let it get out of control. Just let your neighbors know that you're not being lazy and that you're doing it for a purpose. And, you know, everyone seems pretty happy about that.
It also helps when you get cool yard photos that you can share with your neighbors, so they can see all the cool stuff it's bringing in.
Yep. Send them pictures, stuff like that, because that gets them interested. So.
All right. So we're already after 8 o'clock. A couple of quick things I just want to touch on. There was a question in about how long do seeds last. I don't know. Does anybody want to attempt to answer that? Because I know it can vary. And it can also vary depending on how the seeds have been kept. But does anybody have any good background in terms of length of time that they would suggest for how long seeds could last and still be viable?
I can tell you my experience. So I showed you that I take seed and put it in the refrigerator. And sometimes I just put it in the refrigerator without putting it in the moist stuff, and just keep it in a bag in there until I'm going to go with it further. And I've had that seed germinate, not as high a germination as when it's super fresh, but I've had it germinate 3 years later to be, just used after. I'd say, maybe 3 years later, I'll find something in the refrigerator. So, I should have, wonder what'll happen. And I'll put it in a Ziploc bag and get it moist and then work with it from there. And I've had pretty good success on that. I imagine it varies by species and how you're doing that. I've had some of those Ziploc bags where I've had it too moist in there and I've gotten, what's the white, is it fungus or is it mold? I forget what that is. The white fuzzy stuff in there that'll not be good for them. So you don't want to get that too damp, but I've had it for about 3 years and work.
Okay. So I've taken a list down of all the additional questions that we've gotten tonight, and we have a couple that we weren't able to even get to from our previous list as well tonight. So we will be putting together some more information to get out to everyone to try to help get answers to those questions. Thank you to Kate, John, and Hal for helping us out tonight and answering those questions, as well as thank you to everyone who's submitting questions. It helps all of us to learn when we share our experiences and knowledge. So I hope all of you at least learned a little bit this evening. Please give us our feedback if you like this type of a program. Some of it, yes, we'll try to give some information, some newsletter information. I've taken down some notes about some things that we'll probably be sharing on our social media to kind of address some of the questions, but it helps us to know how we can best meet your needs, because we're so appreciative to have all of you with us and all of us sharing our knowledge bank. So Kate, do you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I just want to thank you, Angie, for facilitating our Q&A and getting all those questions organized. And thanks to Hal and John for researching their questions as well. We had a great turnout tonight. We had 116 people who registered. We ended up with our high number was, I think, at 75 for the people that actually logged in tonight. So a great turnout.
Just one other quick question relevant to some of the questions we got too is on our website. Once again, some other information. There's the native plant sources, which I know Kim mentioned that she's been adding stuff about plant sale information as we get it. She'll be updating that. But there's also native plant sources listed on our website, as well as how to choose native plants for your yard. So it separates out through, whether it's shady and moist or sunny and dry. So there's some of those resources on our website as well, which are always welcome to utilize, and hopefully that will also be helpful. So thank you, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful evening. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.